Good day, Thomas Jefferson Hour podcast listeners, and welcome to this week's episode.
You've certainly heard our voices this week for the first time in a long time. You get to hear those of our listeners.
And we're really hoping that this is going to be a regular.
I'd like to do it as every week.
Yeah, I would too.
Because I think that it matters and you get to hear inflection. So, for example, this week we had the gentleman who called the impeachment of Trump a kangaroo court, and you could hear his passion, and it mattered. The tone is as important as the content, and he got a chance to say what he thinks. He disagrees with the way we've been approaching this, and I appreciated that.
The last couple of weeks, though, we've done a fair job of trying to, find some common ground.
Well, two things that every person should keep in mind about this, David. Number one, this is a Republican president being impeached. There will be more Democratic presidents coming, and we're going to get into similar crises in the future. And so you have to try to erase your tribal partisanship and allegiance when you think about these questions. That's the first thing. So everyone should try to think of this as President X and the constitutional process of impeachment. Very, very, very hard, but we should try to discipline ourselves. And the second point I want to make is that in anything like this, all you have to do is to say, what if Obama had done it? What if Bill Clinton had done it? What if George W. Bush had done it? In other words, reverse the lens and try to see it not from your tribal partisanship for your own party, but to say, what if Barack Obama had brought Germany in to try to influence the election by digging up dirt on his political opponents? Just ask yourself what your response would have been then, and what's the proper remedy if such a thing had occurred, and then say, well, why would it be different now from what I would automatically have responded to if it had been done by the other person from another party? And if you do that, it humbles you in a second. If Barack Obama had paid a porn star to be quiet, oh my. If Barack Obama had attacked a Gold Star family, imagine the response from the Patriot Party. It's so important for people to get out from under their tribalism and their kind of automatic allegiances. Their anger and their unwillingness to even credit the other. Just reverse the lens and say, if Barack Obama had done X, how would we have responded?
Let's go to the show, and apologies for running overtime.
But two things, 25th
and missing your essay this
February,
week, next week. Right?
25th of February, my comedy act in Norfolk at the Roper Theater. Come, everyone come. I promise joy. And it's a fundraiser, 25th of February, Roper Theater. It's a fundraiser for WHRO, which is one of our flagship stations. I want to fill that room. I'm making an album. And secondly, the Lewis and Clark Cultural Tour, July 25th through August 2nd, the 18th annual Lewis and Clark Cultural Tour.
We're going to talk about that more next week. I've heard a rumor that your lovely daughter may join us for part of that.
Yeah, the snark is back in the building.
That's good for you.
Yeah, it's very good.
Really
good. Thanks, everyone. Send in your audio questions and comments.
And with that, let's go to the show. Good day, citizens, and welcome to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation with or about President Thomas Jefferson. I'm your host, David Swinson, and seated across from me is the award-winning historian, author, and creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, Mr. Clay Jenkinson. Good to see you, sir.
Hello, my friend, and I might say the author of a forthcoming book, Repairing Jefferson's America, A Citizen's Guide to Civility and Enlightenment, coming out in April or May of 2020 by Kohler Press of Virginia.
And I can testify it's a real thing because I've seen the game.
You wrote, I believe, the preface.
Well, we'll see if it makes the cut.
Oh, no,
right?
It did.
Oh, really?
It's in page proof.
Oh, I'm so flattered and thrilled.
And you are in it. So that book is a kind of a reprisal of my older book, Becoming Jefferson's People. I touched it up for the 21st century, added a new introduction, and a long interview at the end about Jefferson's specific responses to things that he did not live to see in his own lifetime. It's effectively a completely new book, and I hope that people will want to read it. And it's almost a primer for the crisis that we're going through here. In other words, if you read this book carefully, you certainly will get Jefferson's perspective on the way the world has tended since his time, and you will also have a way of thinking about the questions that all Americans are going to have to wrestle with between now and November 4th of 2020. On November 4th, we will know who the next president of the United States is, whether it's the current incumbent or whether it's somebody else. This is the most consequential election of my lifetime.
But they all are.
Well, they're all important, but this is the one that's going to tell us who we are. And I think that every person listening to this should step back and ask yourself, what is your idea of America? What does America represent? What do we value? What are our principles? What is our style as a nation?
There are those who think that the current occupant of the White House expresses that to their satisfaction, that we've lost our way and that this president is writing the course.
Yes, this is the argument.
And they believe it. I mean, sincerely, they do.
The argument is that we need a disruptor and that we got one. That Washington had become complacent, that the two parties had effectively melded into a single entity that's very happy to take money from the wealthiest and most powerful Americans, that the government of the United States is not responsive to the American people, that it's done nothing to cut down the national debt or to balance the budget, that in every possible way the national government of the United States has lost its vital connection with the needs and the will of the American people, and that for millions and millions, tens of millions of Americans in the heartland, the government of the elites of the two coasts have not only forgotten them, but treated them in a profoundly disrespectful and condescending way, and that finally someone came along who said, enough already. I don't care if I have to kick down all sorts of norms. I am going to reclaim this country for the actual people who have been forgotten, and I'm going to go to Washington and disrupt a lot of things that have gotten really root-bound and are complacent and are elitist and are patronizing for the actual people who pay the taxes of this country. And this same president has said, I'm tired of America being taken advantage of in the world's arena by our NATO allies, by the European community, by China in particular, by the problems of NAFTA, which were passed during the Clinton administration. Enough already. We're going to make America first the center of our national enterprise, and we're not going to bend over backwards in every direction to protect everybody everywhere by sending troops and paying for their debts and so on.
Okay, you've made the argument, and it's a pretty compelling one.
And it's a good argument.
And not half of the nation, but close to it, thinks, yeah,
and that his policies, take the tweets and the bombast out, his policies have largely fulfilled the program that he said he was going to bring when he became president. He was going to get tough with NATO. He was going to renegotiate NAFTA. He was going to take us out of the Paris Climate Accords.
He was going to build a wall. He was going to give us a better health care system that everybody was covered. So I have to check you right there. Not all of the things he promised.
He has fulfilled more of his presidential promises than almost any executive of my lifetime, and he's tried to fulfill the rest of them. I mean, I'm not making the case necessarily for him. I'm saying we elected him when he said he was going to build a wall, and he has worked hard. He's even broken the constitutional system to try to get funds for that wall.
The point of this exercise is to say that there's legitimacy in the folks that are for him, and there's legitimacy in the folks that are against him. But the crisis we're going through now isn't really about him. It's about the Constitution and about the office.
Indeed, it is, and it's about what all recent presidents have been doing in one measure or another, sometimes more politely than Mr. Trump, which is going far, far, far beyond the enumerated powers of Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States, and in doing so, they are putting us into a situation in which we cannot really claim to be a republic. And so this is as good a time as any for us to reassert the balance of powers, the checks and balances and separation of powers, and the Trumpites will say, why now? Why now?
Last week we spoke with President Jefferson about this very subject, and you had a brilliant essay, which I would recommend to people. But there's something that we forgot last week. I forgot.
What might that be, sir?
I meant to thank your daughter for doing those two shows. It's always such a joy when she comes in, and it was great to see her, and even better to listen to the two of you.
A friend of mine who listens avidly and lives in Colorado said, we met him in person in Fargo, North Dakota, just before Christmas, and he said to her, I like you because you bring some snark to it.
Yeah.
Which I thought was both
Well, if I get hit by a truck, call her, would you?
Oh, if you get hit by a truck, this whole enterprise is over.
No.
We can't make it.
Speaking of new enterprises, we've got something to do this week that I'm real excited about, and you know what it is.
Well, we have wanted for a long, long time to let the people be heard, not just send us emails that we can then paraphrase or ignore or quote if we have time.
We read every one of them.
But this allows people to speak in their own voice, to ask questions of Mr. Jefferson or to make comments about the program. And this involves a telephone number, and I think you can give all of the...
We just started this, and we've already gotten a number of calls. We're going to go to some of them today, but it's at jeffersonhour.com/ask, or the call, you can call the number, but it's 701-575-0727. I suggest you go to jeffersonhour.com and click on Ask President Jefferson, because you can get the parameters about how the calling works, and we want to make sure that everybody understands that we can't do 15-minute calls. We try to keep them concise.
Our job.
Yeah, that's your job. Anyway, I thought I would start with one this week from Paul Grossgold, who's a longtime listener.
Yes, I know that name.
And he has a question about historians. May I play it for you, sir?
Of course.
This is Paul Grossgold, very long-time listener of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. This question is for Clay. I just completed James Mattis's excellent book, Call Sign Chaos. I knew that Mattis was a student of history, but did not appreciate until reading his book just how much he has internalized history into his leadership planning and decision-making processes. It would seem then that there are really two types of historians, academic and practical. Practical historians like Mattis turn to the past in order to guide them in the present. The Thomas Jefferson Hour, it seems to me, seeks to bridge the academic and the practical. I wonder if you would agree with that, and if so, comment on this assessment.
It's a great question. I certainly appreciated it, Paul. Yes, there's kind of a hierarchy. So there are strict academics who publish on very narrow fields like certain questions of the linguistics of Anglo-Saxon or a foreign policy decision made in the age of Otto von Bismarck and its implications for the next 8 years of the German Federation's history. We need those academics. We need people who do pure, pointed, narrow, deeply scrupulous, heavily footnoted and cited scholarship. The world depends upon that. And then there are people who take all of that, an article about something that Meriwether Lewis did when he was in his court-martial in 1795, or something that Meriwether Lewis did when he was back in St. Louis forming the first Masonic Lodge west of the Mississippi River, or a certain dispute that Meriwether Lewis had with the War Department over his vouchers in the year before his death on the Natchez Trace. And those historians take those specific pieces of historiography and they tie them together and synthesize them and provide a kind of overarching context or narrative for them. And that too is academic history. And then you go to someone like Stephen Ambrose, the great late Stephen Ambrose, who lived with one foot in both worlds, and he writes history that can be read by actual human beings. Academic history is often very difficult to read. It's heavily footnoted, and so academic history can be very intimidating to all of us who are not at that high realm of the academy. But someone like Stephen Ambrose brings really great academic credentials to bear on popular history. He writes it for well-educated Americans. He writes it for curious Americans who do not have a deep academic background or any instant or available access to the academic community. We need that too. And then there are mere popularizers. Think of the History Channel, for example, and they take all of that and turn it into a kind of infotainment, a kind of entertaining history. And frankly, I just saw myself this weekend in a thing about the men who made America, and I was interviewed for a whole day, and it turned out to be kind of a rotten piece of historiography, shallow. They had reenactments that were cheesy and awful, and they quoted me and others out of context, and the narrative that they brought to bear on it really distorted history to a considerable extent. And so every historian has to place himself somewhere in this spectrum, and I want to keep a foot in the academic world, but to be skeptical of it. I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about, that I've nailed the life and history and achievement and the outlook of Thomas Jefferson, that I'm reliable to you as a Jefferson historian. But I also want to bring Jefferson to a larger audience, because Jefferson himself believed that we're up to it and that the citizens need to be well informed, that we can't govern this country by way of a tiny elite in the academy or in the halls of Congress, that what he would call average American citizens, curious, well-informed, thoughtful, need access to the thinking of our time and to understand their history as fully and with as much nuance as possible. And I see my work as, in a sense, I'm a popularizer, although that term slightly rankles my spirit, but I know that what I'm trying to do is to carry Jefferson far, far, far beyond the groves of the academe.
Good answer, sir, and I hope that satisfies Mr. Grosgold. We're going to take a short break, but when we return, we'll have more questions from listeners. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation with or about President Thomas Jefferson. I'm your host, David Swenson. Seated across from me is the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, Mr. Clay Jenkinson, and this week we are answering questions from listeners.
I love the academic world. I've been part of it at different times in the course of my life. I've written some academic prose, and I have edited the journals of Lewis and Clark in North Dakota, which is a sort of purely academical thing to do. But my heart has always been in the public humanities, and I got that from my dear friend and mentor, Everett C. Albers of the North Dakota Humanities Council, who believed that taking ideas out of the ivory tower and into the agora, into the public forum, but doing it in a rigorous and thoughtful and intelligent way, and not dumbing it down, but not getting stuck in academic jargon, that's the whole purpose of a Jeffersonian democracy. And meeting Ev Albers changed the entire trajectory of my life, and I'm so thrilled that somehow it percolates in one form into the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
So we're talking about, you're referring again to the letter from Paul Grosgold about types of historians, which you answered in the first segment. And I found that very interesting too. You know me, I'm like, I want first person. You know, if it's the Revolutionary War, I want to go to so-and-so's journal. The accounts of Jefferson, first-person accounts of Jefferson are what I find the most fascinating.
Well, these are known as primary source documents in the trade, and there are more of them now than ever because of the internet, the digitization of culture, including, by the way, at the Theodore Roosevelt Center at Dickinson State University, which I created. We're digitizing all of the papers of Theodore Roosevelt so people can decide for themselves. You don't need to come at Theodore Roosevelt or Thomas Jefferson through historians. You could go to the Library of Congress and read all of Jefferson's letters yourself and make up your own mind. There are more documents available to more people today by magnitudes of magnitudes than ever before in human history. And an average citizen living in Virginia Beach or Colorado Springs or Visalia, California, can go to the internet and read the primary source documents of the cleaning crews at the White House, of the secretaries to famous ambassadors. They can go to any public figure almost in human history, and it's going to get better and better and more and bigger and more searchable. It's an astonishing revolution, and now there is no excuse for not following your curiosity wherever it lies, because you don't have to get on an airplane and fly to Paris to find out what's in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. You can do it from the privacy, as the British like to say, of your own room.
Let's move on to another question. This one's from Andy, and it's about the appointment of judges.
Hi, my name is Andy. I've been listening to your podcast since about 2005, but I had a question directed towards both Clay and President Jefferson. I was curious because of the outsized footprint that Trump has on the media. Something that seems to have flown under the radar is the appointment of federal judges that seem to be relatively young and primarily Federalist Society picks. I wanted to get the opinions of both on what they thought of the long-term consequences of these judges with lifetime tenures, what that might entail? Thank you. Bye.
Andy, that's a great question, and the answer is sort of the same from Mr. Jefferson and from me. Jefferson was very distrustful of the federal judiciary and didn't particularly like life tenure on good behavior because it gives so much independent power to the judicial branch of government. And, Jefferson famously said of judges, few die and none resign. And if life tenure was an issue then, when people only lived into their 40s and 50s, imagine what he would think of life tenure now when Justice Kavanaugh, for example, nominated and confirmed to the Supreme Court in his 40s, could literally live 6 more decades, a couple of generations, while being a Supreme Court justice, which is the same thing for Justice Roberts and all of the rest. It's not a partisan comment. And so Jefferson, I think, would be very concerned about this. However, for Jefferson and for me, elections matter. We knew in 2016 that the next president was going to nominate a whole bunch of federal judges, and probably including 2 or maybe 3 Supreme Court justices. We knew that Hillary Clinton was going to nominate judges of a certain sort, let's just say on the more liberal progressive end of the spectrum. I don't think she was going to nominate wild liberals, but we all knew that she was going to nominate centrists and center-left people on the whole. And we knew that Donald Trump had pledged that he was not only going to nominate people not on the center right, but on the right, that the Federalist Society was going to play a key role in this, that he was going to take back this country by way of the judicial branch of government. And he said that he was going to use a litmus test, which no previous president had been willing to acknowledge, on the question of abortion, that he was going to nominate and confirm, if possible, pro-life candidates for the courts. And to this date, President Trump has nominated, and the Senate has confirmed, almost 190 judges and justices, and he'll do many more in the last year of this administration, in spite of what Mitch McConnell said about lame ducks back in the Obama era. And if President Trump is reelected, he'll nominate scores, maybe hundreds more judges, and each one of them, once confirmed, will serve for life. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad, but it means that elections matter. You can think about the economy, you can think about our foreign policy, you can think about our infrastructure or immigration. Those things come and go. Judges stay forever. And so when you vote next time, 2020, you should think, what kind of justices and judges do I want in the judicial system of the federal branch of the government of the United States? Because that power of a sitting president, particularly a 2-term president, can actually change the entire trajectory of judicial response to public events in the United States of America. So it's a really good question and an important one, but all I can say is elections matter. We elected Donald Trump. He has every right to nominate people of his choice, and if the Senate is willing to confirm them, that's how our system works. There's nothing to lament.
Here's another one, just really more of a comment, but a nice one, from Wesley Cheney. You remember?
Oh, I know Wes.
Hello, Graham. Hello, Clay. And hello, David. And this is Wesley Cheney calling you from Norfolk, Virginia. Just a big shout of thanks for coming out and speaking a few weeks ago, Clay. It was fantastic when you were at the Harrison Opera House. And you've been a real inspiration. And thank you so much for everything that you've been doing. I've been listening since you were broadcasting from the 20th floor of the new Enlightenment Tower. So keep up the good work. Dream higher, citizens. Cheers, y'all.
Dream higher. I like it.
That's a great comment.
You were where that he saw
I was
you?
at the Norfolk Opera House.
Oh, yes.
On behalf of the Norfolk Art Society, in conjunction with the Chrysler Art Museum's exhibit about Jefferson at the Architect.
Remember, we talked about that, but the one that's coming up is the one you're really excited about. That's in a couple of weeks.
Yes, Wes. Tell everyone you know and everyone in the Norfolk, Virginia area.
First week of February?
This is February 25th.
Oh, excuse me. So a ways away.
Just at the end of February, and it's my one-night comedy hour. I'm going to do comic stories from my life as a public humanities scholar. And I know people may be a little skeptical of that, but I promise you that there will be a laugh a minute and that it will truly be greatly entertaining. I've done little bits of it here and there before. I'm going to tell the famous pickle story. But back to Wes Cheney, we've known each other for a long time. Back, in Reno, we broadcast not from a barn. That would be difficult in the deserts of Nevada, but from the 22nd floor of the New Enlightenment Radio Network Tower in Reno. And I'm glad that Wes remembers that. I had such a good time in Norfolk for the Jefferson as Architect exhibit. The Chrysler people were fantastic. There were 900 people at the Opera House. They had to move it from the Chrysler to the Opera House. It was one of the great moments. There were a few little glitches with the sound system, but nothing in particular. I mean, to be able to speak in my own tights or Jeffersons before 900 people, and to make them laugh and to make them think and to encourage them to be Jeffersonian in their response to the world is like the ultimate power. It gives me more joy than anything that I ever do to write something that people find useful or entertaining or funny or insightful, or to say something that helps people sort out their view of the world, particularly the public world, or to entertain people, but from a humanities perspective, not from sort of bathroom jokes and so on. These things are the greatest joys of my life. And in the last few weeks, I've had these moments where people stop me on the street and say, "Hey, I think I know you." And then they give me these sort of compliments in the manner of Wes Cheney. And David, I know you get this too, but it so moves me. And it makes me think that this choice that I made long ago, two roads diverged in a wood, I took the road less traveled by, dressing up in the costumes of dead men. There's a lot of downside and baggage to that, let me tell you. And it's easy for anyone who ever wants to dismiss me as a historian to say, "Yeah, I saw you in that wig." That comes with the territory. And
your wig's fine. I'll stand up for it.
It's a choice that I made, but it comes with the territory, and it's not pleasant. And I have considerable regrets when I think about that. But then when I think what that road that I've taken has enabled me to do, to see, people to meet, places to go, places to take people on cultural tours. The response we received to the essay I wrote on the impeachment in October and November went viral, at least in our little world. And I was getting calls from journalists from around the country about it, and congratulations. And it was retweeted and shared in something like, several 100,000 people. And you think, this matters. It's gratifying. Thank you. Thank you.
Simply stated, you have a platform and you've earned it.
I want a bigger one, so if you would just give me the ranch, if someone would just endow this.
I'm going to move on to another question. This gentleman didn't leave his name. I'm not sure why, but we've chosen to use this question, and it's actually for Mr. Jefferson. Can you answer from that?
No, certainly. I'm suiting up while I do the call.
Mr. Jefferson, I have a question regarding Edmund Burke. Were you aware of Burke's writing, and especially the argument he made in Thoughts on the Causes of the Present Discontent regarding the necessity of political parties as they were just emerging in England beginning about 1775? Thank you for your time, and love the show. Bye.
So, Mr. Jefferson, how would you answer that?
Yes, citizen, I was aware of the world of Edmund Burke. As I know are aware, he supported the American Revolution. He defended the rightness of our response to British tyranny. He worked hard in the Parliament of Great Britain to make the case for the legitimacy of the American Rebellion. It's not that he wished us to be independent of Britain, but he did understand that as good Englishmen we had a point, and that it was a constitutionally legitimate point, that we were not represented over issues of taxation or regulation of the economy, and that this was to violate the most sacred part of what it was to be a citizen of Great Britain or the British Empire. So, of course, we were aware of that and grateful, because he was a fairly lonely voice, certainly at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. I had less respect for him in the ways that he defended the French system before the French Revolution. And he felt that the French Revolution was a nightmare of atheism and mob violence and class warfare and so on, and that the French were actually better off with a gradualist approach to reform that the French Revolution was a spasmodic and terrifying bloodletting that really unleashed the darkest energies of humanity. And he attacked Thomas Paine, who had written a book called The Rights of Man, defending the French Revolution and saying that however much it went into excesses of one sort or another, it was a necessary and valuable bloodletting, which was my view too. So that made me appreciate Burke less. I know that political parties are inevitable, and as you well know, sir, I helped to create one. Madison and I inadvertently created the anti-federalist party called the Jeffersonian Republican Democratic Party, and I became the president in some sense on the basis of the emergence of that party system. But I had deep, principled, philosophical misgivings about partisanship, and I hope that we could be an essentially nonpartisan people, that we would be rational, and that we would think independently, each of us, and not simply submit our opinions on public affairs to a body of men of any sort, any faction. I think is a violation of the independent sovereignty of the human mind. So Burke was a great man and an important one and a friend to America, and I acknowledge that, but I don't always agree with all of his writings and his principles.
Mr. Jefferson, for those listeners who don't know who Edmund Burke was, could you give us a bit of background?
Just this, he was an Irish-born British parliamentarian, and he flourished at the time of our Revolution. He was an extraordinarily effective public orator, a man of great intellectual capacity and discipline, a great conversationalist. And he lived in the age of Dr. Johnson. In fact, he was a friend of Dr. Johnson and attended many of the meetings of the literary clubs and tavern gatherings that Dr. Johnson so appreciated. But when the American Revolution came along, and Great Britain's essential response was deep anger at the American cause, the Irish-born Burke, who knew something about colonialism, therefore, became a significant champion of America.
Thank you very much, President Jefferson. I'm certain we shall speak again.
Thank you, sir.
And would you like to come back now, sir?
Oh, I'm back. So, this pulling off and putting on wigs and tights.
Yeah. But thank you for playing along.
But going back to the historiographical questions for a moment, David, I can channel Jefferson.
I know.
It's like I can order a pizza as Jefferson. I can check into a hotel as Jefferson.
Please order a pizza as Jefferson.
That Jefferson is so easily understood that he's always going to be rational. He's always going to be modest. He's always going to believe that the people are equal to the challenge of self-government.
Will this be for delivery or?
Sir, if it wouldn't be too much difficulty, I wonder if you could deliver a faux Italian piece of crust and sauce to Monticello.
That would be an extra delivery charge. That's quite a ways out, sir.
If you take credit, of course, I would be entirely. But here's the thing: I'm essentially a vegetarian. So if you're going to put pepperoni on it, I would urge you to make it a very not a meat eater's pepperoni pizza, please. I'd have more.
Listen, buddy, we'll make it any way you want. How do you want it?
Let me tell you that I learned how to make Parmesan cheese when I was in northern Italy, and
listen, I got a lot of people here. Do you want to just give me the order or what?
Let me put Mr. Madison on. He will be able to sort this out in short order. He's much more deeply understanding
You have just heard Thomas Jefferson order a pizza. I have to apologize for that. Would you like to as well?
People. No, please send pizza vouchers.
That was fun.
But we make light. But if you name a subject, take the subject of Syrian refugees. Now, Jefferson has nothing to say about Syria. There isn't even a nation of Syria in Jefferson's time. But we know what he's going to say, that nations have a right to determine who's in and who's out. It's also in our interest to be deeply humane and to be sympathetic to human suffering, that wars have the horrible effect of displacing innocent people from going about their innocent lives, and that this is why war is something that we should seek to end once and for all, that most squabbles and conflicts.
You're kind of making this sound easy, like anybody can do it.
It is. Anyone can do Jefferson.
No, your encyclopedic knowledge and all it amazes me how you can just draw things out of this.
We know what he thought, and we know what he would think on most issues. And yet, the most paradoxical and perplexing and mysterious of the Founding Fathers.
That's it.
That's it. That's why we do it.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we have a few more questions from our call-in Jefferson line, and I'm excited to get to them. So we'll be back in just a moment.
Double cheese, please.
You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I'm Clay Jenkinson. Out of character this week, we've devolved into car talk. We're taking listener questions in audio form. We've ordered a pizza. We're waiting for that pizza to come. Jefferson would have a special warmer that he had devised to keep it warm. He would have a cutter that he had manufactured out of small tools. He would call back and say, good pizza, very good, but I think we can improve upon the recipe if you will only add a little less oregano. Jefferson was one of those people who mastered everything, and the idea that he would order a pizza seems a little impossible since Charlottesville is 5 full miles from Monticello.
He was beginning to irritate the delivery man.
Yeah, well, he had a very short-tempered phone operator.
Well, should we go to another question from one of our
Yes,
listeners?
let's do.
This is from a gentleman who is pretty conservative and says so at the beginning.
I have a question, and it's a comment, too, about I'm a lifelong, I'm a Republican voter, and I'm a latecomer to Trump, but this was a kangaroo court. It was an impeachment hearing which was stacked, and the opposition was not given a fair hearing. And in this case, how about Biden? You neglect all of the bribery which was clearly stated by Joe Biden in giving his son that great big job. This is a kangaroo court, and you won't convince people like me that there was any justice in it. Thank you.
I'm glad for that question.
I thought you would be.
I don't agree with it, but I respect it. So let me say where I do agree. And I know some people will be angry with me about this, but the fact that Joe Biden's son, Hunter, took a $600,000 job with a Ukrainian oil company without any real knowledge of the petroleum industry, and clearly, without question, having been hired for that job because of his connection to the vice president and now the former vice president of the United States, is in itself a form of corruption from a Jeffersonian point of view. There's no way that Hunter Biden would have gotten that job if he were Hunter Smith or Hunter Jones or Hunter Jenkinson or Hunter Swenson. He got that job because he was the son of a very important American statesman, Joe Biden, and that's automatically a form of corruption in my mind. It's not equal. It's not the same thing as what President Trump did with respect to the president of Ukraine and so on and so forth, but it makes this a more complicated political moment, and it shows that there is plenty of hypocrisy in the Democratic Party as well as in the Republican. The best thing that Joe Biden could possibly have done when that news became public is say, I'm stepping down, I'm not going to run, I'd love to help save this country. I disagree 100% with everything that Donald Trump has done. I think he's a disaster. I know that I could probably win, but I'm stepping down because I feel so strongly about civic virtue that I don't even want the appearance of impropriety. And then Biden should have said, I'm stepping out, and I'm asking Donald Trump to not stand for re-election, to end his presidency after a single term on the same principle that we need a higher order of civic virtue in our political figures. I'm going to do it to show that it can be done, and I'm asking President Trump to do it to help save this country's Republican form of government. Now, and people are just going to, what world do you live in?
Yeah, really.
You're just nuts. But I'm really troubled by that. As to the procedures in the House of Representatives, I don't know enough about this. I don't trust the Fox view that this was done in a basement in secret and it was a kangaroo court. I don't think that's probably true. But I do think that if I had been Schiff or Nancy Pelosi, I would have bent over backwards to make sure that this was the fairest, most inclusive, most mutually respectful, most nonpartisan thing that it could possibly be, that the Republicans would have substantial capacity to bring in their own witnesses and so on. It would have made a circus out of it. But I think that this opens the Democrats at least a little to the charge that this gentleman makes.
Yeah, but this was no court in the House of Representatives. It was like a grand jury. It was an indictment here, and it's the Senate where the trial is to be held. He uses the term kangaroo court twice.
Right, I disagree with that.
And I do too, because that's not what this was. It wasn't. They don't have the ability or the power constitutionally to try the president. All they can do are lay out the facts. Now, if you want to make the argument that the Republicans didn't get a chance, well, then you go back to, well, nobody could testify. They were gagged.
Well, I would say this, that the Democrats in power should have tried harder to go to the Republican leadership in the House and say, without making this a circus, is there anything we can do to bring this into a greater sense of fairness and satisfaction to your party?
Maybe they did. We don't know.
Right. I don't think they did.
You don't think so?
No. So anyway, the point is we don't know enough, and ignorance is not a good thing. But I refuse to believe that this was a kangaroo court. They had a right to indict. They did indict. This is what happened in previous impeachment episodes in American history, and now it goes from the indictment, which indictment happens every day. You know, they say in legal circles you could indict a ham sandwich. So the indictment has occurred, and now the Senate needs to be the impartial jury that sits in judgment of this.
Well, I liked your suggestion, but I also have a little bit of trouble. I mean, obviously, I agree. Had it not been Biden as his last name, he probably would not have been offered this position.
This stinks in my nostrils. This idea that people cash in, that former senators become lobbyists or rainmakers.
The fact that this happened with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden has nothing to do with what Trump did, unless you're saying, let's rewrite all the rules for everyone. And I don't think that's what he's saying.
I'm saying that the reason why average people in middle America are fed up to the point of electing this president is because they're sick and tired of the elites protecting other elites, that the wealthy protect themselves, that the system appears to be rigged, that merit is not the answer in these questions, that people are cashing in former senators, former representatives, former cabinet members, and that the vice president of the United States didn't have better sense than to tell his son that is not going to be okay in this family. And let me go further. In the past few days, we're recording this in early January of 2020. In the past few days, former Vice President Joseph Biden has said that he will not necessarily comply with the subpoena from the United States Senate in the trial. This is such a disastrous thing for him to say, because he should be saying a duly elected body, the Senate, if it subpoenas me for whatever reason, I must respond to that subpoena.
I was going to let this go, but I got to back up a little bit, because I think that's what he did. But the point of that is, here's the point we need to take away from that, is Trump's political advisors are a lot smarter than the Democrats.
Maybe.
Because what they have done is divert everything, just like he did in the previous election. This is the way he wins. He diverts any criticism of him.
Of course, project it right back on the other.
But I am also glad that this gentleman sent his letter in, and I would entertain more of those.
Joe Biden should have said, there is absolutely no reason to subpoena me. This is apples and oranges. These are unrelated. However, if the United States Senate subpoenas me, of course I will comply with that subpoena, because that is what you do as a citizen of the United States when a lawful subpoena is brought to bear on you. How can the Democrats say Trump won't allow his people to be subpoenaed if Joe Biden, as a citizen of the United States, says that he will not abide by a duly passed subpoena of the United States Senate?
Another notable Biden gaffe. It's
not a gaffe. It creates open hypocrisy in this grave moment in American history.
Let's move on to another, if you are finished with this subject. This one I'm very interested to hear your response to. And in his question, he mentions Joseph Ellis, who I think it's about time we call him again.
Time for Joe. Yeah. Time for Joe.
Hey, Clay. I'm an avid listener for many years, and I'm reading Joseph Ellis's American dialogues, and he brought up again that mention of the Jefferson's 74 ordinance against the expansion of slavery in the Western territories. But it lost by one vote. Who was that guy? Who was that New Jersey representative? And why hasn't Hollywood come up with a movie yet on that? I mean, just one vote could have changed the course of history. I hope that guy had a good excuse and he wasn't at Starbucks eating drinking coffee or something. Happy holiday. Love you guys. Thanks.
Well, I'm certain that he wasn't at Starbucks, whatever else he was doing. That Jefferson is all over the map on the question of race and slavery, but in 1784 he wrote the Bill for the Government of the Western Territories, and he thought he could solve the problem by outlawing slavery from crossing the Appalachians into the great interior of the continent. He thought if we can stop slavery at the crest of the Appalachian Mountains and confine it to the original 13 states, many of which had already effectively abolished slavery, that we can prevent this from becoming a widespread contagion. And he hoped that his fellow Americans would realize this is territory that's not yet settled. There's nothing we have to protect there. This is open, except for Native Americans. It's a tabula rasa. Let's write a post-slavery software for the American West. It seemed to be, to Jefferson, a really interesting compromise solution. He didn't say let's take slaves away from their existing masters or free existing slaves. He didn't want to get into that morass of property rights and compensation and Fifth Amendment takings and the peculiar institutions of the South. He said, let's accept where we are. But now that we're going to be moving more completely into the interior, let's prevent slavery from poisoning that innocent landscape in the way that it has poisoned the original 13 colonies. And if he had gotten away with it, it might have prevented the Civil War. It would have localized slavery in Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia to a certain degree in Maryland. And probably slavery doesn't become as fundamental and divisive an issue as it became by the 1860s. And so at that time, under the Articles of Confederation, we voted by states. And Virginia voted against it, by the way. Jefferson voted for it, but he was only one vote in the Virginia delegation, and that was winner take all. So Virginia, as a state, voted against the Jeffersonian prohibition of slavery across the Appalachians. And when the final moment came, it failed by a single vote in New Jersey. I don't know who that person was, but the caller is right. This would be a great Hollywood film. It's so tragic. Jefferson said, heaven was silent in that awful moment, and now millions of unborn Negroes will be enslaved to men they never offended for the lack of a single vote in the Congress of the United States.
What about his assertion that it would have really changed history fundamentally? Do you think so?
It might have.
Yeah?
It might have, because when great nations make great decisions, however hard they are, there's really no turning back. Take Obamacare. Once it was passed, the American people are not okay with it being entirely rescinded. No one could take Medicare away from the American people or Social Security. These are decisions that get made. They're monumental. They have an enormous influence. Now, you could say that slavery was going to find its way into the West one way or the other, and there would be secessionist movements in Texas and Tennessee and Alabama.
Do you think it would have somewhat cleaned Jefferson's current stained reputation?
Of course. And, this was not his only attempt. He got Congress to ban the slave trade after 1808. He was president of the United States. He had introduced a bill in Virginia that would free every child of slaves at a certain year. But that's not what people write on his statues in France.
No,
but it's a complicated picture. So for the first third of his life, from, say, 1 until, let's say, 40, Jefferson wanted to find a way to end slavery and to free slaves and to get out from under it. And he worked hard at it, and he took some political chances, and it cost him politically in a big way. Then he starts to think, well, the time will come. Let's consolidate the revolution we have. Our children will be more progressive than we are. They will be more morally attuned to the evils of slavery than we are. We'll get out from under it. And that was the middle portion of his life. And then when he retired, so beginning around, let's say 12, so he's been in retirement for 4 years, he starts to harden, and he starts to defend slavery. And he even says that we should allow it in the American West because it'll be better somehow for slaves if we diffuse it across a broader landscape. And he fights the Missouri Compromise of 1819 and 20, believing that it's the death knell of the nation. And he writes that famous awful letter to Edward Coles saying, I'm too old to any longer get involved in this. This is for some future generation to handle. So there are three Jeffersons: the young, principled idealist who took real political chances and tried to get things fixed and failed. And then the somewhat more sober Jefferson of the middle years who waited, and then in 1880 he was able to convince Congress to outlaw the slave trade and so on. But he was less ardent at that point. And then the retirement Jefferson, who from any point of view is a deep and profound disappointment on the question of slavery and emancipation.
Clay, we're almost out of time. We've had so much fun, I have, listening to these questions come in, and I have to apologize, but I've sort of preempted your essay this week.
We'll save it for
next time. It'll be back next week. I'm going to try to sneak one more in, if I might.
All right. Then thanks, everyone, for calling in, and continue, please, to put your questions and comments to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. We're very appreciative.
Yes, President Jefferson, enjoying your show. I was wondering if you could have a show on your relationship with John Adams and how that worked out over the years. And I see that John Adams was the only founding father who did not own a slave. If you have any comments on that, thank you very much.
I don't think it's true that Adams was the only founding father that didn't own a slave, but he was one of the few.
He did have slaves, though, did he not?
No, that was Hamilton.
I'm pretty sure Adams had slaves.
Well,
in his
let's
house.
get Joseph Ellis on the line.
We'll
we need to
find
do,
out,
of the 100.
I don't think he owned them, though. So
No, he never owned a slave. Of the 100 topics that I love about Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson and John Adams is in the top 5.
But we've done many Thomas Jefferson hours involving John Adams. How else would you have had the opportunity so many times to call me an Adamsite?
You are, unfortunately, an Adamsite, but you'll get over it at some
That's got to be the
point.
next one we want. John
Yes, but
Adams ordering pizza. That would be good.
I wanted toppings, and you didn't give them to me. In the ancient republics, the toppings were always forthcoming. I'm sputtering about this. And Hamilton he's a brat of a Scotch peddler. He couldn't deliver. He should be delivering pizza, etc.
Sorry I brought it up. Anyway, we are out of time for this week's Jefferson Hour. Please go to jeffersonhour.com, learn more about the show, support the show, find out about Clay's cultural tours and his appearances.
July 25th to August 2nd, Lewis and Clark for the 18th time, the Wendover Death March.
Let's talk about that next week, okay?
Let's do.
All right.
Let's do.
So thanks for another enlightening conversation.
And more, please, all of you, send in your questions and comments. It's easy enough to go to the Jefferson Hour site and get all of the details. We deeply appreciate it.
And again, a sincere thanks to all of you who left questions for us. Go to jeffersonhour.com, click on Ask, and leave yours.
We'll see you next week for another exciting edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
The Thomas Jefferson Hour is brought to you each week by Dakota Sky Education. The program is distributed nationally by Prairie Public. President Thomas Jefferson lived from 1743 to 1826, and this program presents his views. President Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author Clay S. Jenkinson. To obtain a copy of this or any show for a $12 donation, please call 701-575-0727. This program is also available online at jeffersonhour.com and on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to correspond with President Jefferson or submit a question for him to answer on the program, please visit the website at jeffersonhour.com. The Thomas Jefferson Hour is produced at Makoche Recording Studios in Bismarck, North Dakota. Bach Cello Suite No. 3 in C Major by Stephen Swinford. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again next week for another thought-provoking, historically accurate program through the eyes of Thomas Jefferson.